students. Welcome back to term 4. Now, I know that there's going to be some times, especially in these first few weeks, where you guys might be traveling in and out of school for your VCE classes, not this week, but starting from next week. And so, if you are going to miss the start or the end of a class because you're traveling to or from school or anything like that, just send me an email and let me know. At this stage, there's no word yet as to when Year 10 classes will be back on site, but I will definitely keep you up to date as soon as I hear anything about that. We need to get straight into it with today's lesson. Now, I'm going to ease you into this semester's worth of work. So today's lesson is all about an introduction about what you will be learning, and then just one task after you take some notes about our brand new topic. So I'm going to try and follow a very similar process, which the feedback I got was that people were quite comfortable with, where I provide you the opportunity to come onto Zoom and discuss anything, ask any questions. And for those people who would prefer to just send me an email to do so, I will give the information about our learning through these YouTube tutorials, and there'll be some worksheets and some activities that are required completion. Don't forget that the only way you're going to be able to keep a summary of your learning is by keeping notes of what I'm delivering to you in these YouTube clips. So let's get straight into it. Now, I thought it was interesting to go back to here and have a look at Year 10 Health as a semester-based subject. We've done the Understanding Health and Human Development last term with that area of study and that SAC, and we are now doing health issues in youth with this area of study and a SAC towards the end. Don't forget there's also an examination that will take place scheduled for week 8 of this term. So we will have learning for about 6 weeks, the SAC in week 7, and then the exam in week 8. So if we go down to area of study 2 here, and we have a look at what you guys are going to be learning, it's going to be looking at the issues that you may face throughout adolescence, so the time that you're currently in now. You will look at the health information, look at the importance of nutrition, the status of different individuals, look at smoking, alcohol, illicit drugs, and look at both risk factors and protective factors about those. I've also made sure that everything within this sequence is as easy to flow as possible. So we've got our 3 outcome tasks. We'll be looking at drawing reasonable and informed conclusions with our critical and creative inquiry within the learning dispositions to try and solve problems. And you'll be taking responsibility for your own learning because there's quite a lot of research and inquiry-based tasks. I'll show you the rubric as well coming up. But here's our weekly plan. So 3 lessons per week. We will have injury and alcohol as our focus for this week. Illicit drugs and smoking will be next week's focus, and there'll be a drugs research task, which is an outcome task during next week's classes. Week 3 and going into week 4 is quite a large portion of nutrition, and we will also finish that off by just looking at a 1 lesson around sexual health. At the end of nutrition, there is a Super Size Me task, which I'm sure is a documentary/movie that a lot of you have seen, but we'll have some time to watch it and answer some questions about it. And then we jump straight into discrimination and stress. This will be a bit of a creative task here around writing an article around discrimination. Finally, the world around us. Here's an extra optional task that I've decided to add on, and Miss Ady decided to add on at the end of last semester's classes. And if we don't have time for it, that's okay, but I would like to be able to get to it to see how within Australia our youth health issues are common or different around the world. We'll then have SAC week and then into our examination. So I'll just show you quickly the rubric. So when you do complete the SAC at the end of this term or in week 7 of this term, you'll be asked to do each of these things. Describe specific health issues, describe the impact of health issues on the dimensions, going back to what we learnt last term, identify and explain both risk and protective factors, which we will be learning today, explain the personal strategies that assist young people in coping with a health issue, and describe a government and non-government program that has been developed to help address a youth health issue. That's both part of what I would deliver to you and your research. And if we go all the way up to where we're aiming for, it's about our level of evaluation here and being able to use examples to evaluate. So, year 10, when we evaluate things, we're looking at positives, negatives, and we're also looking at our own sense of language use to articulate what that means. And who does it mean for? It is the youth health, because that's our focus for this term. So I really want you to think about every time I ask you to create something, whether it be writing that article, researching something, or even in today's task where you are creating a fact sheet. Simple dot points would receive an S in an outcome task, showing an understanding. But if you really are striving to do well on the SAC and leading into the examination, I would like you to start trying to develop an evaluation level response in what you're articulating in your words. So really try hard in describing in more detail and using that analysis tool of what's good, what's bad, the pros and the cons, the positives and the negatives, and really showing a level of ability to deeply understand this content. And I like to think about it like a PE sense where I say, what does it feel like? What does it look like? If you put yourself in this position, we're not just learning facts for no reasons. I'm teaching you this because this is about adolescence. It's about youth health. It's about the health of individuals within Australia and the world, and that is you guys yourselves. So, what I think I'll do now is I'll just show you our compass page. Now, the lesson plan will look different by the time that I've finished writing it. The learning tasks are all being set up. There is no learning task for today, but what I have done is I've put together a new folder here called Term 2 to 4 because we're in Term 4, and inside there is some curriculum documents. I just showed you the rubric, the learning map, and the learning sequence, so you guys can go back to any of those documents at any point as you wish. And today we're in week 1 and we're looking at this one here, injury, promoting youth health and well-being. Alcohol use and alcohol effects will come later in this week. So here is the PowerPoint and let's start going through it. Remember, in these PowerPoints, thank you to Miss Adi who did design them, when you come up with this little pencil icon, that means you should be taking notes, whether that's done on Microsoft Word or whether that's done in your workbooks. I need you to make sure that you are keeping a tally of those notes. Let's get started. This is all about promoting youth health and well-being, making sure that the youth within Australia and around our world is healthy. So as young people move from youth to adulthood, they're interacting. They're interacting with people, places. There's a lot of healthy life, positive family relationships, education, social connections. Intimate relationships are starting to form in a different sense, which I'm sure a lot of you guys have experienced or are experiencing. Meaningful work, starting to get a job to earn money, but also putting together your schoolwork and having more meaning with it, like what we're doing right now, which is learning something that is personal to you. Leisure activities, which I know during this COVID time has been taken away for some of us, like our basketball, our soccer, and our sport, or maybe even just our socializing, and just maintaining that healthy lifestyle, both with physical activity and nutrition, which we know we'll be studying. So, there are two main things that I'm talking about right here, and they are these bold words: risk factors and protective factors. And this is examined on the SAC at the end of the term. So, a risk factor is something that increases the chances or likelihood of developing a disease or injury. So, if you are doing something that has a possible cause for disease or injury, that is taking a risk. That is a risk factor. If you're doing something that is a protective means, a protective factor, that is something that enhances the likelihood of positive health and well-being outcomes. This lessens the likelihood of that negative health and the well-being from exposure to risk. So, as we move on, we will look at different examples of these throughout this PowerPoint. But here are a huge range of different things we need to take into consideration. Obviously, we know some real common ones. Things like drug taking. If you are taking legal and over-the-counter drugs like a Panadol, it is promoting health to make you feel better when you are unwell. If you are having illicit or illegal drugs, it is a risk factor because of the side effects and long-term risks that can take place. However, there's a lot of different things that we need to look at here. Socioeconomic status. What does it mean if somebody has a higher or lower socioeconomic status about different risk and protective factors that they are exposed to? Things like social cohesion and working together as a group, and social inclusion. If somebody has a large group of friends, a good family structure, lots of people that they can trust and rely on, what does that mean for different protective factors in comparison to risk factors? The media, not just things like the news and movies and things, but nowadays social media. What does it mean to have risk factors as a part of social media means? So, we can go around this wheel and go through everything, but I think that's going to be part of our work moving forward. I think that there are different elements here that link to what we learnt last term about employment, geographical locations, etc., that would help you to understand both positive and negative health factors here. And things like health literacy is how much people understand about health and what is positive and what is negative. So here are some different examples, like I said. So things like injury. A risk factor for injury is jumping off high structures. I was young once too, and I know males do this more than females, but the excitement, the adrenaline of climbing up a high fence and then jumping off, that is a high risk factor that you are going to injure yourself that doesn't need to be taken. And there are reasons why people decide to take those risks, and we need to look at those. Stress. Stress is a health issue, but there are some protective factors around that. Parents who role model how to deal with stress effectively is a good protective factor. Smoking. Now, smoking is a major health issue, and a risk factor is having friends who do smoke. That peer pressure of trying to fit in and do the same thing as other people. I'm not going to go through this entire list, it's there for you to read, but you can see now what some different risk factors and protective factors are. Now, there are some different areas in which our youth health and well-being has some action that we need requiring. So some of the different areas are obviously injury, alcohol use, illicit drugs, smoking, weight issues, sexual health, stress and discrimination. And as you'll notice, as I went through the learning map before and the learning sequence, these are going to be what we flow through in the next few weeks to give you some more detail. Today is all about injury. So, before we move on, I want you to do this process. If we were in the classroom, I'd say turn to the person next to you and have a chat. What I'm going to ask you to do right now is either with somebody in your house or your family, or if there's nobody available, then you can do this by yourself in a little brainstorm, but have a think about it. What are some different types of injuries that contribute to youth mortality and morbidity rates? Now, I'm not going to give you the answer here. If you're struggling around that mortality and morbidity still, go back to your notes from last term. Go back to the PowerPoint from the start of last term where we talked about what mortality and morbidity is, because that language should be common to you now, just like if I was using the word sickness or health, which you obviously know what means. So have a think about it. What are some different types of injuries? I know I can list a few straight off my head. Can you? The next one I want you to think about is how can the risk of injury and death to young people be minimized? What can we do as a society? What can I do as a parent to help reduce the risk of injury and death to people within my family as they grow up, like my daughters? I want you to think about that before we move forward. If you need to pause the video, then please do so. Okay, so I think it's important that if we're talking about injury today, we actually look at a definition of injury. So injury is an umbrella term. That means it encompasses a wide range of things. And it looks at things and a range of different causes of mortality and morbidity. So it's things like traffic accidents, suicide, poisoning, falls, violence, drowning. All of these things are a range of causes around that mortality and morbidity that we learnt from last term. Now, although death rates from injury have decreased significantly over the past 20 years because of healthcare and advances in technologies in health, and also safety means in things like cars with airbags, etc., we know that injury still includes suicide, which is a leading cause of death for youth in Australia. And this is not right. We need to look at what is going on here and how can we help the youth within Australia feel comfortable, strong, and confident enough that this will decrease and ultimately disappear and not be an issue. Don't forget to take notes about what injury is. So there are some serious outcomes from injury. So more common in things like road accidents, where it is a high impact incident that occurs. And those serious outcomes are things like spinal cord or brain trauma, which can cause injury or death. And so the outcomes that contribute to morbidity without life being threatening, which are things like more common in sports, soft tissue sprains, things like muscles, ligaments, tendons, sprains and strains. Also, we have things like broken bones or fractures within bones, cuts, eye wounds, and dislocations within joints. Those are ones that are not major causes of life changing and are just short-term injuries, but they are still within that injury category and relate to the statistics. Young people get injured on the roads quite a lot. This happens while socializing, participating in sport and recreation, and throughout the workplace. During the youth stage, the areas that the brain controls decision making is still developing. So it makes sense that as somebody is young and growing up, sometimes they don't make the best decisions. They don't have great self control. Some people are much more developed and mature than others. And so we also look at things like the reward processing within the brain and the pleasure seeking areas within the brain, which can lead to youth taking more risks. You heard me mentioning before about jumping off high objects. When that happens, it's because of the pleasure seeking areas within the brain and the reward of being able to do it and having friends and family look on and go, wow. But because that decision making and self control is still developing within the brain, looking at why and how that injury that could occur of that risk is not fully developed yet, which is why youth have a major area of injury cause. So, now to today's task and the end of our lesson. You need to think of a type of injury. I've gone through a range of different injuries. It could be a sporting injury like an eye injury, a bone, a fracture, a dislocation, a cut. It could be something that's much larger like trauma to the brain or spinal cord from a car accident. What I would like you to do is have a look at these websites, and there are links to these websites in the lesson plan. I want you to choose one type of injury. It could be, the rolled ankle through sport, or it could be, as I said, car crash injuries. And I want you to create a fact sheet. Associated common injuries, risk and protective factors. What are some treatment suggestions? Where can you get help? What are the statistics and what is the prevention? Now, I don't need this due in by the end of today, and if you want to take it for a bit of homework as well, that is absolutely fine. When it is complete, it would be great for me to see it by emailing me the task. However, I'm not creating a learning task for that activity to be completed. The scope of injury choice can be wide or narrow. You guys can pick one specific injury, and when it talks about things that it leads to, can it lead to a long-term issue? Does it mean calcification of a bone, or can it mean loose tendons, or does it require surgery, etc.? Or if you're picking something that's quite a large area, then you don't need to tell me every single aspect of it. Of this fact sheet, I would like it to be one, maximum 2 pages, lots of color, borders, images, etc. Try and keep them so that it's not for somebody squirmish to look at. Just keep them nice and maybe a swollen ankle if that's what it is. I don't want to be seeing anything that's too graphic in these fact sheets. Good luck on today's task. A Zoom is available for you if you require it. As you've seen from the lesson plan moving forward, today is the only class about injury. We will move on to alcohol consumption and alcohol issues on our Wednesday and Thursday classes of this week, and I'll see you soon.